But we begin tonight, as we do every night, keeping them honest. Tonight, a made-up story about the President of the United States and the politicians and pundits who are spreading it. Now, let me start by saying it's not our job to defend the President of the United States. We don't take political sides in this program. We're not liberal. We're not conservative. We try to hold all politicians accountable on facts, on truth. And there's a lot of reasons to oppose this president. And there's a lot of ways our government wastes money. No one needs to make up any stuff or spread false stories about waste. But that is exactly what is happening right now. Perhaps you've heard the story that President Obama's trip to Asia starting tomorrow is going to cost taxpayers, you, $200 million a day, about $2 billion for the entire trip. Perhaps you've heard or read online that 34 Navy ships are going to be diverted for the trip. It sounds outrageous, a multi-billion-dollar boondoggle, a slap in the face to recession-weary Americans, a clear example of an imperial presidency and wasteful government, as Congresswoman Michele Bachman said last night on this very program. She was on to talk about budget cuts and balancing the budget, and my first question was about Medicare, but she clearly didn't want to talk about that and went right to the president's alleged $200 million a day trip. Republican Paul Ryan has suggested sharp cuts in Medicare and Social Security. Are you willing to make cuts there?
I think we know that just within a day or so, the President of the United States will be taking a trip over to India that is expected to cost the taxpayers $200 million a day. He's taking 2,000 people with him. He'll be renting out over 870 rooms in India, and these are five-star hotel rooms at the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel. This is the kind of over-the-top spending. It's a very small example.
Well, I challenged her on the numbers. I told her the White House says they're wildly inflated. She didn't back down, though, saying, quote, these are the numbers that are coming out in the press. No, it sort of sounds legitimate, right? The press, newspapers, networks, they check facts, they have multiple sources. But it turns out the only press in which this story was coming out was an Indian press report. And that $200 million a day figure, where'd that come from? Well, that was in a quote by an alleged Indian provincial official reported by India's press trust, their equivalent of our AP or Reuters. I say alleged provincial official because we have no idea who this person is. No name was given. It was an anonymous quote, the kind that Sarah Palin has recently been railing against. Some reporter in India wrote this article with this figure in it. No proof was given, no follow-up reporting done. Now, you'd think if a member of Congress was going to use this figure as a fact, she would want to be pretty darn sure it was accurate, right? But there hasn't been any follow-up reporting on this Indian story. The Indian article was picked up by the Drudge Report and other sites online, and it quickly made its way into conservative talk radio.
In 2 days, and I'll be in India at $200 million a day.
Have you ever seen the president? Ever seen the president go over for a vacation where you needed 34 warships? $2 billion. $2 billion. 34 warships. We are sending... He's traveling with 3,000 people.
But the idea that you're going to take 3,000 people and you're booking over 500 rooms in a hotel and you're taking 40 airplanes.
$200 million
a day.
200 million?
No president has ever anywhere close to 40 airplanes, 3,000 people, 500 rooms in one hotel. And that's just one hotel. For a 10-day trip, $200 million a day. It's never been done before.
$200 million. $200 million each day on security and other aspects of this incredible royalist visit. 3,000 people, including Secret Service agents.
You take this many people, this many airplanes, the question is, are you coming back?
Again, no one really seemed to care to check the facts. For security reasons, the White House doesn't comment on logistics of presidential trips, but they have made an exception this time to say the $200 million a day figure is wildly inflated. This morning, Robert Gibbs was asked about it at the White House.
We have set the record straight with you guys. I'm not going to go into how much it costs to protect the president. Costs are comparable to when President Clinton and when President Bush traveled abroad. This trip doesn't cost $200 million a day.
Even the Pentagon weighed in, knocking down the idea that so many Navy ships were being redeployed.
I will take the liberty this time of dismissing as absolutely absurd this notion that somehow we were deploying 10% of the Navy, some 34 ships and an aircraft carrier in support of the president's trip to Asia. That's just comical. Nothing close to that is being done.
Let's remember, the war in Afghanistan costs, according to the Congressional Budget Office, about $190 million a day. So the idea that a president's trip might cost more than the war in Afghanistan, That just doesn't make any sense. I want to bring you over the data wall now, because even though we don't know the final number for how much this trip is going to cost, we do have some hard facts to go on. And by the way, these facts could have easily been checked by anyone who is spreading this story. Take a look. President Clinton made a trip to Africa in 1998 that gives some sense of what presidential trips cost. And Clinton's trip was to 6 countries in Africa. He crisscrossed the continent over 11 days. It involved 1,300 people. And according to the GAO, the cost of it, adjusted for inflation, was about $5.2 million every day. So that's what that trip cost, $5.2 million every day. Now, let's look at comparison. President Obama's trip will be going to 4 countries in 9 days, fewer countries than President Clinton. We don't know the number of travelers, we don't know the final price tag, but there's no reason to believe it's even close to $200 million a day. The guy from the Pentagon you saw earlier, he said this is comical. Well, it would be comical if it wasn't being used by a powerful congresswoman and powerful pundits. There are plenty of reasons to oppose the president, plenty of things to point to as government waste and overspending. You don't have to make stuff up. Joining us now, Democratic strategist James Carville, also former Bush White House Chief of Staff Andrew Card. Andy Card, let's start off with you. You've been a former Chief of Staff. You've been on these trips. Even the remote possibility of it costing $200 million a day, I mean, does that even pass the smell test to you?
It doesn't to me, but I think the White House is appropriate and say they don't talk about what it costs for the president to travel. Look, we want our president to be safe wherever he goes. I can't imagine it would cost $200 million a day. If it costs anywhere close to that number, the president should be asking tough questions of the Defense Department and the Secret Service and the State Department. But he should also be paying attention to keeping his entourage as small as credibly possible and still do the job that he has to do for the country as he travels around the country.
Well, apparently a number of CEOs and business people are going with him on this trip to try to push American businesses in Asia. By the way, Mr. Card, has anyone, like, you know, from the talk radio world or Congresswoman Bachman's office called you to confirm any of these or check any of these numbers?
No, I have not heard from any of the so-called pundits or personalities in the media, including you, Anderson. I didn't hear from you as to what the numbers might be. But
well, you're on side, so you did hear from us.
Well, at any rate, you know, there are lots of exaggerations in the political world. I think this is an exaggeration. I don't think that you should be hyping it as much as you are, because it's not as big a deal as you're making it out. But yes, people are worried about the government spending too much money.
See, the reason I do mention it is because Michelle
do care about spending money.
Right. The reason I mention it is because Michelle Bachman used up our airtime last night rather than asking questions about Medicare to talk about this.
It's not your airtime, Anderson. It's not your airtime.
Well, it's
she was invited
the hour
on.
I have on the show, and she chose to spread a story which is blatantly false.
And you're flogging the heck out of it, and I think that's not very responsible either. There are bigger issues to talk about.
I have no doubt about it, but she brought it up, so I want to check.
And you're bringing it up again. You did it again.
Check the facts.
And you know, let's talk about the government spending too much money. The government is spending too much money.
Sure, we're going to talk about that actually right in the next segment, but this is how we're starting off.
You're a big enough guy to defend yourself, but I might point out to Mr. Card, you asked about Medicare cuts and Medicare costs, and that's what she responded to. I'm sure that Mr. Card would agree that Medicare spending is a big issue and obviously a big cost. But I have a conflict because I endorsed Ms. Bachman on Good Morning America.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, I said I hope.
I'm sure you did a lot of help for her.
A lot of help for her, but I think she'd be great out there.
I want to play, Mr. Card, I want to play you something that John Boehner has said about the key priority for him moving forward in the next 2 years. Let's play that.
There's a lot of tricks up our sleeve in terms of how we can dent this, kick it, slow it down to make sure it never happens. And trust me, I want to make sure that this health care bill never, ever, ever is implemented.
I also want to play for our viewers something that Senator Mitch McConnell said a goal of the GOP is to basically get the president out of office.
If our primary legislative goals are to repeal and replace the health spending bill, to end the bailouts, cut spending, and shrink the size and scope of government, the only way to do all of those things is to put someone in the White House who won't veto any of these things.
And finally, I want to play something that President Obama said at his press conference yesterday about bipartisanship.
I told John Boehner and Mitch McConnell last night, I am very eager to sit down with members of both parties and figure out how we can move forward together. I'm not suggesting this will be easy. I won't pretend that we will be able to bridge every difference or solve every disagreement.
Now, a lot of liberals are using all of these quotes and saying, well, look, this is a sign that the president's reaching out, but conservatives aren't. Do you think, A, that's fair? And if it's not, do you think there is room to actually work together?
Well, first of all, the quote from Mitch McConnell was a little bit old. It wasn't really contemporaneous to what happened on Tuesday. And Republicans do want to bring more discipline to government. They do want to repeal and replace the health care package that the president put in that jammed through Congress. I think that the president is obligated to make significant steps toward cooperation with the Republicans now that the American people have spoken so loudly, and I think that's what can happen. Clearly, it's going to be very, very tough, and if President Obama wants to be part of the solution, he's got to take the steps to be part of the solution. If he doesn't want to be part of the solution, the Republicans will put things on his desk, and I don't know whether he'd veto them or not, but he should be part of the solution. He should be working with the Republicans, as he promised to do when he first took office, and he did not do.
By the way, the soundbite from Mitch McConnell was from this morning at the Heritage Foundation. James?
Yeah, look, I thought what Mitch McConnell said actually is speaking the truth. Is that if you want to do nothing on climate change, if you want tax cuts for the rich, if you want more deficits, if you want to do all of these things, yeah, you need a Republican president to do that. And I didn't really, if he would have said something else, I would have thought he was being kind of phony about it. Honestly, I thought he was being truthful. But, you know, the Democrats, one of the things that we tend to forget here is before it gets to the president's desk, as I understand it, it has to go through the Senate. And there still is a Democratic majority in the Senate. So it's all this that John Boehner has to negotiate with the House. But I think if you're a constitutionalist, of which these Republicans claim they are, I think the Senate has some say-so in this.